And I've pressed record. So welcome everyone. This is our second artist of the month, and we're really glad to have Lynn Cox here. So Lynn describes herself as a visually impaired coach and trainer, but I think there's a lot more to you than that, Lynn, and we're going to discover some of that.
Oh, thank you. Yes, lovely to be here, and thank you for asking me to do this.
Okay, well, the first question is just to tell us a bit more about yourself and your work.
Okay, yeah, I originally trained actually in maths and computing, and kind of realised that probably wasn't for me. And at the time in the mid-80s, being visually impaired, at the college, Royal National College for the Blind, you couldn't do the A-level in art. And if you couldn't do the A-level in art, you couldn't get onto a foundation course, and then you couldn't get to art college. And that's why I kind of went down the maths and computing line. I could do it. It was logical. It was still creative, but in a different way. Anyway, I got to the end of that and thought, I don't want to spend 12, 14 hours a day in this huge big office with this strip lighting, you know, open plan, feeling as if somebody was looking over my shoulder. So I was lucky enough to get some assistance from guide dogs, and I retrained, and I did a foundation course and a BA in fine art at Wimbledon School of Art, and I did sculpture there, and I also did my MA there afterwards. So I've been an artist, in brackets, quotes, for nearly 20 years since I got the MA. And in that time, I suppose I changed my ideas of what I wanted, what I thought art would be, and how I thought I would interact with art.
Yeah, Wimbledon, what a great place to study. I know we've got a couple of mentees who've been through there recently, and it still sounds like in all the changes happening in art education, it's still keeping up a really good, interesting standard.
Yeah, Wimbledon's interesting because it's such a small art college, and it's actually art school, Wimbledon School of Art, and it's got that small college feel. So you probably got 20 people on the sculpture degree when I was doing it back then. And it meant you got quite a lot of individual support, and, you know, those great big, huge, you know, almost hangars. We used to work in there in the sculpture department. And I suspect now it's a lot more free flowing, because when I was there, if you studied sculpture, you stayed in sculpture. You know, you weren't meant to do photography, you weren't meant to do painting, you weren't meant to tootle over to the theatre department, which of course we all wanted to do once you were told you couldn't do it.
Yes. You know what I'm hearing now with sort of all the cuts that are happening, that things are going way back, like in Central St. Martin's, when they're in their old building, the fashion students used to hang out with the fine art students, and they'd all be mixing together and making stuff, sharing ideas. And in the new building in King's Cross, they're on separate floors, and you can't get into one department unless you've got a sort of like a fob to let you through the door. So I bet they are finding ways around it, but it seems like they've lost what was a real important thing about, you know, the fashion students are artists as well, and it's needing to change.
Absolutely. It was that intermingling. Do you know what I mean? On that, you know, unofficial kind of basis, a lot of it. But, you know, you could walk for the theatre departments and see what they were doing, or if you were working with light as a sculptor and you needed to change the light, you'd say, oh, can I just have a couple of films? And you could change, you know, the visible lights so your sculpture was lit the way you wanted it. Just little things like that, you know. It was a very friendly school, and very different to my previous experience when I was doing maths and computing, because that was such a big college that you almost felt lost in it in a way.
And a big thing, I think, in Wimbledon is still the theatre and set design. And I think there's been a lot of artists have come out of that, because you learn all these very strange skills, how to make, you know, like an imaginary world, and work with a lot of different materials and painting and the stuff like that. Did you have anything to do with those students?
A few of them more on an informal, go down the pub basis. But I think even then you find out what they're doing and what's going on and how they're making things. And, you know, as a sculptor, often you kind of nip into theatre, you know, because I obviously did a lot of prop design. So you would kind of pop your head in and say, what would be the best way of doing this, you know, and you did have that interaction.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a real history of people like Chagall, I think even Picasso as well, did a lot of like theatre designs for operas and the like. And I don't know if there's more to say on this question, because you've said a bit, but the question is, how did you come to be an artist?
I think I always loved making things at home as a kid, but I didn't see it as art. So I do like tapestry work, you know, with that cloth that used to have the little holes in it, and you do little designs, so you do crisscrosses and all this, or little zigzaggy patterns, or whatever. And I used to love just doing that. And I used to love having a piece of paper, getting a pencil and just drawing and making as many, you know, like crazy walking on the paper. And then each little section that was made, I'd colour in a different colour, you know, the felt tip pens when you used to get like 60 different colours per pack. And I used to love just mingling the colours and mingling the patterns. And I've always loved patterns. And then you could be a bit more decisive, you know, how you did the pen work, what you did. And I used to do that all the time just to entertain myself as a kid. And when I was about 14 at school, I remember them teaching perspective to us.
Yeah.
And half the kids didn't get it. Now, at art, my art was always too bad because of my sight being so poor at school. But they did twig that I did understand the concept of perspective, and I knew there was a disappearing point or two disappearing points, depending on, you know, what you were doing, and, you know, whether it was like a room or a road scene or something. So I got the concepts of art even at school, but obviously my drawing, you know, life drawing was a nightmare. You know, if you had a still life, I couldn't see it a foot away, let alone half a classroom away. So I loved art. I loved making stuff and doing things as a kid, but I really didn't see it as art until I went to the Royal National College for the Blind, and we had an inspirational art tutor there called John Everett. And whilst I was doing my O-levels and A-levels there, and I did do O-level art at that time, I'd spend 90% of my time in the art department making stuff. So if I didn't have a class, you knew where I was. I was in the art department. I was either weaving, I was doing clay work, I was doing drawings. And one of my works at that point did a little international tour. It was a little scene like on clay, and it was like relief work, and it was a horse with somebody stood on it, with somebody stood on them, so it was a circus scene. Then you had the ring and somebody going through it, and different things. You could see the outside of the ring and the people looking over into it, and this circus scene. And it actually got into, without my knowledge, John had put it into a little exhibition that toured around Europe in the late 80s. And I came back after my maths and computing degree, just contacted John and said, I want to be an artist. That's what I wanted to be, 5 years ago. I love the creation of the, making programs. I love the creativity. I just really can't stand, the day-to-day logistics of being a computer programmer. And he very kindly arranged with the Royal National College for me to come back for a year to do a bit of tutoring in the art department, some tutoring in the maths department, and in return they let me do my A-level there. He helped me apply for Wimbledon School of Art, and he got my career going. And really it was from these things, making clay work, very basic stuff, that it developed into what it is now.
Wow. It's interesting, isn't it, how one person can make such a massive difference on your life. If he hadn't been there, or if he hadn't been interested in supporting you, you probably would have found it too hard to better get yourself an A-level and get in there into Wimbledon.
I think especially with people's attitudes then, that you know, no way you can do the A-level paper, there's a life drawing. Whereas that 5 years on, they'd let you do it as a sculpture rather than a drawing for that element of it. But you're right, because he got the funding, because obviously I'd used my grant to go to college, the government grant. So without him helping me to get the funding from guide dogs, who back then realised life expectations a bit more, and they had a bit more money. They could be, you know, nowadays it wouldn't be allowed because it's not strictly within their brief. But back then, that they realised the difference it would have made to somebody, and it really did. I was so grateful for that.
There's this life drawing class that I think it's the Royal Academy or the Royal College for visually impaired artists that I was watching a video about. Have you come across it?
I've heard about it. I'm ever so slightly wary about life drawing classes, because when I was doing the foundation course, I was quite adamant, because we used to do a week of everything. So a week of photography, a week of design, a week of this, that, the other. And it was a week of the life drawing. And I said, it's not fair. You've got to allow me to do the life drawing. I want to feel the person. I want to be able to do it on my own terms by feeling the person. Anyway, they agreed to this. I thought, oh, brilliant.
That's great.
And turned up the week of the life drawing, and it was this obviously naked, really hunky guy doing macho poses. And to be honest, I was so embarrassed.
Yeah.
They kept me quiet much if the rest of the term. So since then, I've always been slightly wary. But I have heard of those courses, and I think they are quite popular, because if you've got a bit of sight, you can actually quite, go right up to the people and feel. But even back then, I would better feel the person. And I thought, oh, Lynn, beware of what you ask for.
Well, you missed your chance there.
Yeah, I should have just gone for it, shouldn't I?
It was an art school. I could see the banner headlines in the Daily Mail the next day.
Yes. But the poor chap had agreed and everything. But I was a lot shyer in my early 20s than I am now. I'd probably jump on it now.
The next question is, what art inspires you? I mean, I think you've said a lot already, but there's... Yeah.
I suppose I went to art school. I mean, I came from a background where my parents never stepped foot in a gallery, didn't know anything about art. So it wasn't until I went to the Royal National College for the Blind, and we did some exhibitions there, but not many, on day trips. And then, of course, I was away from art, and the next thing I know, I'm at art college, and I've got no idea of contemporary art at this point and what's happening. I know about 6 artists. So, I started going around the galleries in London. This would be 94 on my foundation course, and I was absolutely and utterly blown away by Helen Chadwick's exhibition at that point, because I thought until that point I've got to make clay stuff, I've got to carve, I've got to whatever as a sculptor. And I just walked, it was an exhibition at the Serpentine Gallery, which if anybody knows, it's this beautiful gallery in Hyde Park and Kensington Gardens. Never know which side. I think it's Kensington Gardens. And you used to go through the front doors, and you just went through the front doors, and there was the chocolate fountain there, cocoa. And just the smell of the chocolate, the sound of it bubbling. I mean, I really thought I'd walked into Willy Wonka's factory. Do you know what I mean? It was,
Yeah.
And she let me touch anything that I could touch, even like the mounts on prints and stuff like that, so I could see how she'd framed stuff, the materials she'd used. The piss flowers were there, which were the big, like tables, small table flowers, but you know, with the points made, you know, from casting the snow. And I just walked out of there thinking, that's what I want to do. I want to make multi-sensory artwork that's not twee, that's not you know, that's not cutesy, but is saying something about and getting to our emotions. And that's really when I thought, I don't, you know, it was an element of what I wanted to be, but it wasn't everything. So I knew that was a way to go, multi-sensory. It wasn't until actually on my BA we came across an arts group, which I'm sure you've heard of, called the Situationists.
Yeah.
And they were a group of guys primarily in France in the 1950s. And their leader was Guy Debord. And there are two techniques that are absolutely intrinsic to my own practice. The first one is called Psychogeography, which is connecting the feel of places rather than geographical locations. So you might connect places because, I don't know, they got a market and they got the sound and the smells and all of that. So it's completely on the ambience. So you connect the markets in London, say, or Dudley and Bilston and whatever, you know, wherever you are, you'd connect. But the bits in between didn't matter. It was the ambiances and the differences. Well, the Situationists used to use it on the most gigantic pub crawls ever, as well. So there's a fun element there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I thought, I just love this idea. You know, you walk, you stroll. There's something called the derive, which is the drift, and you just get pulled to where, oh yeah, feels good going that way, and you get yourself lost on purpose. And as a blind person, one of the things you are is terrified about getting lost because, you know, especially in the 80s, you know, we didn't have iPhones and apps that could put us right within minutes. But I love that old concept of, again, it was multi-sensory, it was space, it was energy, and it was drifting and it was going places. And I thought, that is me. And the other thing the Situationists tended to look at was the relationship between work and leisure. So as an artist, my work is some people's leisure, and vice versa. Do you know what I mean? So if you enjoy something so much, it's just having the, you know, what is work, what is leisure? If I'm writing about a football game, does that then become leisure or work or a bit of both? So it's all these nuances that I really love working with. Yeah,
that's great. I think that's really interesting, that thing about people talked about that sort of psychogeography and human geography and then architecture and just the use of space and the sort of city as a place of play. Remember, I think the guy who's one of the editors of Oz, he wrote a piece about play power and about the city being a place you could just play in. The next question.
Sorry, you feel the city as well.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's how you feel the city as well, because I can walk into most buildings and tell you the size of it by the echo coming back to me. So there's aspects like that I'm really interested in, and that's when it goes into more that architectural realm, because if buildings aren't designed for you to get a response from, it's harder to kind of know where you are.
Yeah. And is it a very different feel for you if you were doing that same psychogeography in a rural area in the countryside?
Oh, I love it. A few years ago, I was asked by Disability Arts Online to do a write-up for, or Dashies, M21.
Oh, yeah.
So it meant I went to Wenlock, where the alternative Olympics were done, where we get the name Wenlock from. And I basically did some of my own work while I was there, and it was looking at those psychogeographical elements. You know, there's the old priory there, and then there's loads of sheep that kind of go right up to the town. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and there's walks, and you've got the walks. So actually, it's a different aesthetic in the countryside. And it's possibly harder to find because it's more subtle. In some ways, it's more rewarding. I mean, I still use some of the sounds that I recorded on that trip in some collaged artworks I've made, because they're just so powerful.
That's amazing. I've forgotten about you coming to M21. That was a Dash event that we ran. And,
yeah, it was. Yeah. And it was like following the events around Wenlock. So I remember, I'm having a blank with a name. I want to say Naomi.
Naomi.
And she was rolling around the streets, and we were following her and things like that. It was just really interesting. And what was nice about it is the events themselves almost were a psychogeographical event. That's how I kind of saw it, because they were quirky. All these things happening in this very British little town.
That's exactly what it was about. You got it in one there. I wish I'd known the word psychogeography, because that would have looked posh. We could have put that in the program. You're right. It was about it wasn't quite an absurdist, Dadaist, situationist piece of work. But I never really thought about it that way until now. The next question, I think you probably
perspectives, don't we?
I was going to ask you if you have particular artists or artists or any art movements that inspire you, but I think you've just said that. But if there's any other people you want to mention.
I think they're the main ones. I mean, I do like other artists, and I suppose I take away what I can from them. But being a visual artist and being visually impaired, sometimes, you know, the lack of references, because an awful lot of art can't be touched. So I can have it described to me, and that can be really useful. So and I do work with artistic audio description as well. Do you know what I mean? And manipulating that. And yes, you can get an idea, but it's not the same as feeling something, and it's not the same as feeling something, you know, in the UK, in most places, you've got to put on gloves to feel it. Well, you might as well blind me and take me to the Louvre to see the Mona Lisa. It means absolutely nothing if you're going to put gloves on my hands. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I suppose my artistic references are less than a lot of people, and it's little bits and bobs I take from artists. Now, I was lucky enough to feel some of Picasso's work in France, because it was France and they're a bit more modern. And I got the chance of feeling some Rodin, some Degas, and I suppose there's things about their work that I like, especially Degas. Birmingham actually let me feel one of their artworks. So there's that kind of fragility but movement. A lot of my work is about, or some of it is about, sport and sporting events and footballers and things like that, or horses racing, or a horse ready to jump over a fence. I like the big, because it's something I can't feel. I can't feel a horse halfway in the middle of a move to jump. Do you know what I mean? So some of it's imagined, but I like that idea of the movement. And I know, if you remember back for the 2002 Commonwealth Games that were in Manchester, the little figures they drew for that, I'd been drawing those little figures for about 5 years before, because they just, you know, you can do quite simple line drawings and still convey a lot of energy and movement. So I'm kind of interested in, well, some of it is definitely the minimal, almost strokes, except my strokes are done with stitching into paper or using wire or wherever, but the minimal number of lines you can do to convey that movement, to convey that energy, to convey that, whoa, do you know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah. That, I mean, that's an artist's skill, isn't it? To minimize, and because then you convey so much more, because people fill in what's missing. I was going to ask you if you like Giacometti's.
Yeah.
Do you like Giacometti? Have you ever felt a Giacometti?
I do like Giacometti's work. I've had the luck to feel about 2 of them.
Yeah.
So my reference is very low. There was a big Giacometti exhibition probably, maybe even 25 years ago, somewhere in London. I can't remember where, and they let us touch them with the gloves.
Yeah.
And I remember the figures, and I do love his work, but I always take all my jewelry off when they allow me to touch with gloves, and I touch the side of my wrist. So at least I get to feel what the original material is meant to be like.
It looks like his work is quite, not rough as in sharp, but it's not. It's
angled, isn't it? And I quite like that angular form. I'm kind of drawn to that. And again, I think it's part of the mathematician in me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Logic, angles, and a lot of my work is 2D, even though I can't see. And a lot of my work is line drawing, and that could be line drawing 3D as well, because my really complicated wire sculptures, you wouldn't call them simple. But I do think I'm a drawer, whether that's a 3D or a 2D, and I associate myself with that. And I think it's something to do with those angles. So I see Giacometti's work and I see it's a 3D, but I also kind of see it from all the angles and see the edges. I'm really interested in those edges.
What are you working on? Are you working on an art piece at the moment?
Yes, I was very lucky enough to get one of the Richard Attenborough Centre / Disability Arts Online commissions, and their support commissions, and there's 5 artists, and we're all very different and really interesting. We had our first meeting yesterday, which was lovely, and I put in a proposal to do a 4-meter wide skirt with me in the middle, to represent the 2-meter rule and social distance.
Yeah.
And not being able to see as a visually impaired person, and the frustrations. I rarely have the nerve to go out at the minute by myself, in case I go into a shop and walk the wrong way around, or cross the line, or don't stand in the pod I'm meant to stand in, that's unapparent. But it's also this thing, if I need to hear somebody, you're not on a road or something, you can't hear somebody from 4 meters, 2 meters away. No. So it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, and I'm going to make this skirt using my metal wire, white canes, and some dots that are going to be made of for Braille out of beads. And I'm going to film myself around London, like Trafalgar Square, maybe Leicester Square, maybe along the Embankment, just trying to walk in this ridiculous 4 meter wide skirt, just as a kind of tongue-in-cheek, you know. Piece, just commenting on the situation now and highlighting it. And I'm hoping to get some comments from visually impaired people as well, and maybe do a little audio piece.
Good luck with that. That sounds great. Can't wait to see the film.
Well, it's a new one for me because I've done performance work in the past where I've done my drawings on the wall, my big drawings using ropes and pins and stuff like that, and pin them on. But my face has been like in the wall most of the time. Whereas this one, I'm going to be on camera. And I must admit, it is a bit scary, but I think the point needs to be made that way. So it's a slightly new adventure. So yeah, we need to get used to it.
I mean, it's going to look quite amazing as a sculptural piece anyway. Just that's, you know, size of a skirt.
Yeah. And it's going to be made in segments, so it can be taken apart and put together and go off to any exhibitions that have got enough space to show a 4 meter wide sculpture.
Yeah. We're coming to the end now, Lynn. And is there anything else you want to talk about? I know you want to talk a little bit about your coaching, and I think.
Yeah. My actual business is called Arts Coaching Training, and for me all 3 elements are really important. So being an artist, making the artwork's important, but being a coach, helping people to achieve what they want to do in the way they want to do it. So there's a sort of difference between mentoring and training, and they're both very valid and both really needed, I think, within disability arts and within arts, within everywhere probably. But almost coaching will help a person to, let's say the coachee brings the content of what they want to cover, and the coachee helps them bring out their solutions that are their solutions, rather than a mentor might advise them of where to do or what to do or where to go. A coach will tend to not necessarily have to even know anything about the sector. Do you know what I mean? I've coached people that are nothing to do with the arts, but you have confidence that the coachee will know where to go if you ask the right questions. So my job as a coach is purely to ask the right questions, bring out what the coachee needs. Now, a lot of the time that might be breaking down limiting beliefs or questioning values. So sometimes you go in that bit deeper as well within the process, but that they're both really useful. So I work primarily as a coach, and I do a bit of coach mentoring as well. And then I do equalities training, but it's all to do with access, it's all to do with inclusion, and it's all to do with equality. And as I'm getting older, I suppose I'm being more outspoken with some of those, especially as far as the arts are concerned.
Well, I think we've come to the end of our interview, but really interesting journey that was. So thank you, Lynn. And I'm just going to stop the recording.
Yeah, thank you.